So, for my Integrated Field Seminar 2 class, we had to conduct a research project, which at first started out as a literature review with one question, and then about midway through the PowerPoint, we'll go a little in depth with a more in-depth question. So, the first question was the original research question, which is, what are the contributing factors that bring men and women to RestoreCorps? So the significance and relevance to this question is illegal exploitation victims regularly experience undeniable degrees of trauma, which can adversely affect their capacity to function, their conduct, and their self-adequacy. Trafficking survivors may likewise have encountered outrageous brutality and trauma while trafficked, and in this manner have profoundly specialized needs to be met for their emotional and mental prosperity. So in order to meet these needs, there are many programs in the United States that support and advocate people who have been trafficked. So why do survivors need social workers? From an intervention perspective, social workers can assume a part in offering direct help to those victimized through advocacy, psychoeducational, and clinical mediations, which is at more of a micro level. Teaching communities and specialist organizations about the necessities of those misled. So education and all of that is more at meso level, and supporting for foundation and subsiding for mediation and treatment programs, which is also at a meso level. These are nevertheless a couple of ways that social workers can draw in on human trafficking. So one of those programs is RestoreCorps. RestoreCorps serves as the single point of contact for West Tennessee. They provide wraparound, trauma-informed, strength-based case management services for any human trafficking referrals in the 21 counties of West Tennessee. RestoreCorps works to eradicate human trafficking by empowering survivors, training the community, and changing systems to create provisions for victims and increase risks to the buyer and exploiter. So what is sex trafficking? Sex trafficking occurs when a person is made to perform a commercial sex act through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. So FFC. F, force, an example of that is using violence to make a person do a sexual act. F, fraud, an example is a fake promise of a modeling career that begins with nude photos sold online. And C, coercion, an example is a victim is threatened to do something for the trafficker, or else that trafficker will do something to the victim's family or friends. Trauma-informed care is used with RestoreCorps, and using trauma-informed care for people who have been victims of trafficking offers the opportunity to engage more fully in their health care, develop a trusting relationship with the provider, and improve long-term health outcomes. Using trauma-informed care is RestoreCorps' care plan with all victims. Trauma-informed care is not only a best practice when working with illegal exploitation victims, additionally is also essential to guaranteeing that a survivor isn't re-misled while working for independence from their trafficker. It's also important that the survivor feel genuinely, inwardly, and mentally safe while cooperating with staff individuals or law officials. Empathy and respect are the main components to building up trust and rapport with a survivor. So this is just talking about trafficking a little bit, like statistics-wise in Tennessee. These are based from 2010. I went back just a little bit because it gets worse and worse every year. So if you think back 10 years ago, this is how bad it was. In November 2010, there was a organization investigation that was revealed by the TBI, which led to a government arraignment of 29 people who were associated with Somali gangs in the Middle District of Tennessee. They were captured for trafficking young ladies as youthful as 12 across the United States, including Tennessee. In July 2010, a man in East Tennessee was captured for having trafficked more than 400 ladies. And these are just two examples of it can be this close to home. Like, you wouldn't think there were over 400 ladies being trafficked so close to you, that this can happen anywhere. So who is at risk for trafficking? One cause is economic causes. Individuals become the victims of human traffickers mostly because of discriminatory asset portion and the shortfall of feasible types of revenue, which is just poverty. Families have no resources and wages that are super insufficient. So they're needing housing, they're needing something to eat, they're needing clothes for their kids or for themselves. And what do? They get a whisper in their ear saying, hey, I got you, we can make some money. And they get drugged into that. Secondly is sociocultural causes. It's one perspective that is common, it's a common want among men to control ladies and young ladies' sexuality. It's generally thought in numerous societies that men's sexual inclinations are important for the natural plan of things, while lady sexuality is an abnormality spoiled with blame and disgrace. So when a man sleeps with a bunch of women, he's a player, he's a pimp, it's really normalized that way, that he's cool and all the ladies love him. But if a woman sexually has desires and wants to sleep with a few men or whatever she's doing, she's a whore, and that has become normal. While all this, ladies live under the consistent danger of brutality, stigmatization, and even homicide. According to IBelieve.com, though, no one is exempt. There's a lot of things that can make it worse for people, that make them that can make them a victim easier, such as poverty and different things, but it can happen to anyone. It can happen to the pastor's child, it can happen to a neighbor's daughter, it can happen to your daughter, it can happen in one of the nicest homes in Memphis, you know what I mean? No one is exempt to trafficking. There are a few barriers of service to helping men and women with trafficking. A portion of these barriers result from a general lack of information about illegal exploitation in the absence of public familiarity and awareness with the issue, and varying definitions and insight in regard to who is a victim. A lot of people aren't educated on everything. I mean, you say human trafficking and they think people being smuggled into bins and transported across waters and all of these. They think the worst thing, and then they look at a prostitute and they say, oh, she's just a prostitute, she's doing it to herself. They don't think of the coercion, they don't think of the threats, they don't know all of those things. Survivors of illegal exploitation are additionally a hard to come by, hard to reach populace. Numerous victims have been educated to fear law enforcement, frequently because of their own experiences of their encounters with degenerate law enforcement work or authorities of their own country of origin. So, my methodology research question, it went a little more in depth, and my question was, how does trauma affect one's brain? The scientific aspect of it, and then also what normal people just understand. Like, you go through something traumatic and you're not going to think the same way, you're not going to act the same way. I mean, a portion of you has been taken out, punched, and put back in. It's not the same. So I plan to evaluate 12 clients. Now, of course, since we all are here and know our clients, this isn't real because of COVID. So I just want to put that out there real quick. I plan to evaluate 12 clients of ours at RestoreCorps that currently reside in our safe house and interview them with a series of questions to determine if the trauma they endured rewired their brain on how they think, and if the trauma has caused them to act differently than how they did before the trauma occurred. My inclusion criteria is I have chosen this group of women because they have been illegally sexually exploited, and they have chosen RestoreCorps to be their supportive services program. To be excluded from this questionnaire, it's if a person has not been sexually exploited and is not a client of RestoreCorps. My instrumentation for this methodology proposal is the ladies will get a series of 14 questions on the questionnaire. The questions will both be a mix of open-ended and closed-ended questions. Some demographic questions will be used, such as gender, age, education, and family independence. Gathering this demographic information from questions like these is a great way to better understand your client. It should take each participant about 20 minutes each to complete the questionnaire. These questions have been pre-tested for validity to gain assurance that the questions are unambiguous. There are strengths and limitations to doing a questionnaire. The strengths is that it's inexpensive, it's easy to analyze, it's practical, you get fast results, you can pair questionnaires side by side pretty quickly, validity and reliability, and there's no pressure to the, I'm talking way too fast, I need to choke. There's no pressure to the client. There are some limitations as well. The client can give dishonest answers, they can skip questions that they're uncomfortable with, or interpretation issues. Some can have a hidden agenda and lack of personalization. So data collection and analysis. The informed consent will be obtained from participants, and they will be informed of their right to withdraw from the study at any time if they so choose. The clients will be given the questionnaire when I arrive at the safe house immediately before filling it out. The clients will have 20 minutes to write their answers on the questionnaire and hand it back to me when finished. An incentive that is being used for the clients filling out this questionnaire is lunch from Chick-fil-A provided at the safe house after filling it out. In order to retrieve the data correctly for this assignment, I am analyzing different literature and research on how trauma affects one's mind, especially after trafficking via the internet. I will collect data from different reports on the statistics of trafficking data locally and globally. I also plan to evaluate 12 clients of ours at RestoreCorps that currently reside in our safe house and interview them on how, if the trauma that they endured rewired their brain, and how they think, and if the trauma has caused them to act differently than how they did before being trafficked. With reviewing other literature, the three primary parts influenced by trauma is the, I'm not a doctor, so if I say this wrong, I apologize. So it's the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. I wanted to check factual literature that the brain does change after having trauma. Knowing what trauma means for the mind, just as it means for you exclusively, can help you sort out adapting abilities that work for you. Programs like RestoreCorps and other programs can help victims of human trafficking by giving trauma-informed care and helping with different needs to try and reverse the effects of trauma. So my expected results, I hope to find out that if our client's trauma has rewired their brain and personality since being trafficked, there have been findings that trauma can not only affect one's mindset and how they think, but trauma can also completely change a person and who they are. So I have to set aside many biases that I have when working with women and men affected by human trafficking. There are 3 ways I can make sure that my unconscious bias does not take over. Initially, one thing that could be possible right presently is look at my own training by addressing myself with a beginner's mindset, a childlike mindset with non-critical interests. At the point when I will question my assumptions and the instilled convictions that I sit behind them, I will become open to finding my own limitations. It takes a willingness to severely be legitimate with yourself. Secondly, I'll have to tune in. On the off chance that we listen hard to people around us and spotlight on the present, as opposed to assumptions from an earlier time, we may all hear something new. And ultimately, I will look for input and fabricate groups that worth transparent reflection. This is critical to supporting an environment where we gain from our own training and try not to get instilled in set methodologies, so things that have been said before. Expectations of results. I expect for my research and other evaluated research to match, that trauma does indeed affect one's mind. I expect to learn how to formulate interesting questions, develop plans for answering those questions, execute those plans, analyze what has been learned in the process, and communicate my findings. There are many study limitations with the whole thing. We talked about limitations before as just doing a questionnaire, but as the research as a whole, with any type of examination, there comes limitations. With in-depth interviews, there are numerous ethical issues, in spite of the fact that the meetings may normally be restorative for members and offer rich information. This quality can present difficulties to questioners. As analysts empower delicate disclosures, jaw roll disarray may happen. Members could confuse the interview as treatment or as therapy, and as such, the questionnaire as a specialist. Researchers should cautiously keep up with boundaries to ensure that the specialist-member relationship and moral commitments do not damage. I will protect confidentiality of any individual and or program utilized during the research project. All instruments will be anonymous and randomly marked via numbers. Consent forms will be utilized and collected to maintain confidentiality. So what will this study mean for social workers? Doing a study like this can help not only social workers, but anyone who wants to work with survivors of human trafficking. Conducting the study can help people better understand how the trauma of trafficking can affect one's attitude, way of thinking, personality, and much more. Knowing the facts of trauma and how it affects the brain can help people better utilize resources to help survivors on a more empathetic and understanding level. So my audience that would be good for this research project would be funders and donors, program stakeholders and staff, organizations implementing similar programs, participants in the program, general public,